The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet sky, but for Lily Carter, they were nothing more than reminders of everything slipping through her hands. The gallery her father had built with devotion and love was about to be taken, sold to strangers who would never understand the whispers of art that once filled its walls. Her world was unraveling piece by piece, and no matter how tightly she held on, she could feel the last fragments of security drifting through her trembling fingers. She had given everything, her time, her heart, her sleepless nights, just to keep the dream alive, and yet the cruel machinery of debts and betrayal had left her cornered. There was a kind of ache in her chest that went beyond fear. It was the grief of losing something sacred. And yet, in the midst of collapse, fate has its own way of pulling threads together. Sometimes, the cracks where we shatter are the same places where unexpected light filters in. It was in that very moment of hopelessness, when her heart felt like glass ready to break, that his name returned to her. Adrian Knight. Reckless, untouchable, dangerous. A man carved by wealth and scandal, a man she swore she would never trust. And yet he appeared in her thoughts like a flame she could not look away from, even when it threatened to burn. The whisper of his presence haunted her long before he stood before her. It was in the headlines that branded him a playboy, in the magnetic aura that made people tremble with curiosity, in the way his eyes seemed to hold storms. To others, he was an empire wrapped in human form, but to Lily he was the very last person she should ever lean on, and yet he was the only one who could pull her back from the abyss. The paradox itself was intoxicating, and even the air seemed to know that her destiny had begun to shift. The night she walked into his penthouse, the city stretched out like a living canvas beneath glass walls. The elegance of black marble, the quiet hum of power woven into every detail, all of it pressed against her senses until she could hardly breathe. But none of that unsettled her as much as the man himself, Adrian, leaning by the fire as though he owned not just the room, but the very world. His gaze cut through her like lightning, cold and unreadable, yet pulling her with a gravity that felt inevitable. Her pulse betrayed her, racing as though it knew the path she was about to walk was not just dangerous. It was irreversible. "You're late," he had said, voice smooth as velvet and sharp as steel. No accusation, just fact. And in that moment, the first strings of a silent contract tied themselves around her heart. The contract on paper would come later, but this, the unspoken tether between them, had already begun. She wanted to believe this was survival, only survival. She told herself it was necessity, that she was here to save her father's gallery, nothing more. But beneath that resolve, something inside her stirred, something she had locked away in the name of caution. It wasn't attraction in the shallow sense, it was recognition, the way a soul knows another, even when logic screams against it. Adrian spoke of contracts, rules, and the facade of marriage like it was a chess game. His words were precise, detached, but his eyes betrayed something else, a shadow of history, a silence filled with ghosts. And Lily, despite the trembling in her hands, signed, pen against paper, name against ink, and with it the unraveling of one life and the beginning of another. From that moment, the world shifted. Tabloids roared with headlines, strangers whispered her name with venom, and yet she stood beside him, dressed in gowns that felt like masks, walking through ballrooms that glittered with judgment. Every smile was an act, every photograph a stage. But when the cameras dimmed, when the doors closed, she was left with the weight of his gaze and the unspoken truth lingering between them. Adrian was a man of walls, and every wall carried scars. She could feel it in the way his jaw clenched when his past was mentioned, in the way his silence sometimes screamed louder than words. And though he warned her not to look deeper, though he pressed her to accept only what was on the surface, Lily's heart, fragile, aching, yet stubbornly alive, refused to stop searching. What she found in the shadows of his world was not just wealth and danger, but secrets etched in pain, a childhood fire, a twin lost in tragedy, a family legacy dripping with betrayal. Every revelation drew her closer, every confession turned her resistance into threads unraveling in his hands. He was more than the mask he wore, more than the billionaire carved into perfection by society's ruthless gaze. He was a man torn between vengeance and vulnerability, and in his darkness Lily began to find reflections of her own. The storms they faced came in waves, rivals who wanted to destroy them, scandals that painted her as a liar, enemies who waited in shadows with sharpened knives of rumor and threat. Yet through every storm, the tether between them tightened. What began as cold ink on paper became warmth in stolen glances, fire in the touch of his hand, healing in the quiet moments when neither could pretend indifference anymore. It wasn't easy. Love never is, especially when it hides beneath masks of survival. But as Lily stood in the midst of chaos, her name twisted by tabloids, her gallery smouldering under the threats of enemies, she discovered a truth deeper than contracts and stronger than fear. Healing doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes as fire, tearing through the cages we built, forcing us into the open. Sometimes it comes as love, in the most unexpected form, from the most unlikely heart. The journey of Lily and Adrian was never meant to be simple. It was carved in the spaces between lies and truth, forged in the tension of survival and desire. Yet every choice, every secret revealed, every night that left her breathless, led to the same realization. She had not just signed a contract. She had stepped into the story of a lifetime. And for those listening now, carried with her through the storms and the silences, your presence is a light that turns this tale into something alive. If this story has touched your soul, if even a spark of its fire or a whisper of its healing has found its way into your heart, let your voice linger. Share your thoughts, your feelings, your reflections. Let this journey continue with your words in the comments, let it grow with your presence through each like, and let it unfold further with every subscription that keeps us walking together through new chapters. Because stories are not just written, they are shared, felt, and lived. And in that sharing, they become eternal. The night may be long, the storms may rage, but love, when it arrives, writes its own ending. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is only the beginning. The limousine glided through the streets like a shadow, carrying Lily deeper into a life that no longer felt like her own. City lights flickered across the tinted glass, painting her reflection with fleeting fragments of gold, but she could not see herself in them anymore. She was dressed in midnight silk, a gown Adrian's assistant had chosen, one that draped over her curves like it had been stitched from secrets. It was beautiful, yes, but foreign, like wearing another woman's skin, someone stronger, someone untouched by fear. Yet, beneath the glamour, her heart raced with the rhythm of uncertainty. She had agreed to a marriage written in ink, but no paper could bind her soul against the fire that was already burning between them. Adrian sat opposite her, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the night as if it belonged to him. Every line of his face spoke of command, every breath seemed to claim dominion over silence. He exuded a control that was both terrifying and magnetic, the kind of power that drew people closer, even as it warned them to stay away. Lily tried to steady herself, but his presence was relentless. The air seemed to hum with tension, a quiet storm building between them, promising either destruction or transformation. The gala awaited them, a glittering trap woven with whispers and judgment. She had grown up surrounded by quiet galleries, soft light falling on canvases that told stories of love and loss. Now she was about to step into a ballroom where every smile was a weapon and every glance a calculation. Adrien had warned her. Show no fear. Smile for the cameras. Let them see nothing but composure. But how could she smile when she felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice? And then, as though sensing the chaos in her chest, his hand brushed against hers. It was not tender, not even intentional, but the spark that leapt from that simple contact sent her breath scattering. Healing does not always come in gentle touches. Sometimes it comes in fire, reminding us we are alive even when we fear we are breaking. In that fleeting moment, Lily understood. The very man who threatened her peace was also the one whose presence stitched her back together. The limousine stopped, and the world outside roared to life. Cameras flashed like lightning, voices rose in a storm of questions, and the crowd surged forward as though hungry for the spectacle of their union. Adrien stepped out first, every inch the untouchable figure, and then his hand reached back for hers. She hesitated, her pulse thundering, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, unyielding, pulling her into the chaos with him. The world shouted, but she heard only the unspoken promise in his touch. You are not alone. Inside the ballroom, gold chandeliers spilled light across polished marble, laughter and music intertwined like threads of silk, but none of it soothed her. She felt the weight of eyes, of whispers curling around her like smoke. To them she was an interloper, a pawn, perhaps even a fool. Yet when Adrian's arms circled her waist, holding her close, something shifted. The judgment still burned, but his warmth anchored her. In a room filled with masks, he was the only constant. And then the storm took form. Vanessa appeared, radiant and cruel, her beauty sharp enough to cut. The venom in her smile was hidden behind charm, but her words dripped with poison. Lily met them with grace, with a quiet defiance that surprised even herself. For every dagger Vanessa threw, Lily's spirit found a shield, not in Adrian's protection, but in her own quiet strength. Healing sometimes means discovering pieces of courage we never knew were ours until the moment we are forced to stand. But Vanessa was only the first shadow. Damien followed, his presence darker, heavier, like a storm cloud waiting to strike. His words carried warnings, hints of truths Lily did not yet understand. He spoke of Adrien as though he were a monster, of games too dangerous to play. Yet his smirk betrayed a deeper hunger, a satisfaction in watching her tremble. Lily held his gaze, refusing to let him see fear, even as her heart whispered of danger. The night blurred into a series of steps, each one pulling her deeper into a labyrinth she could no longer escape. Adrian whispered instructions, his touch guiding her through the crowd, but she could feel his own tension simmering beneath the surface. He was not as untouchable as he appeared. Beneath the tailored suit and cold smirk was a man carrying shadows too heavy for one soul alone. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when no one else was looking. And though he tried to bury it, Lily felt the pull of it, the silent cry of a heart that had forgotten how to be healed. Later that night, when the music faded and the crowd dispersed into silken darkness, Lily found herself alone in the guest bedroom of Adrian's penthouse. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart still racing with fragments of the evening. She had signed a contract. She had promised herself this was nothing more than survival. Yet her soul knew otherwise. She was no longer simply fighting for her gallery, for her father's legacy. She was entangled in something far deeper, something dangerous, something that felt disturbingly like destiny. Adrian moved through the halls outside her room, his footsteps measured, his presence undeniable even in silence. And Lily, though she told herself she wanted distance, felt her pulse steady at the thought of him near. The storm had only just begun, and yet she already knew. She was no longer merely surviving. She was awakening, step by trembling step, into a love that could either destroy or heal them both. The hours stretched, carrying her into restless dreams, and when she awoke, the world had already changed again. A new day, a new headline, a new danger waiting. But in the soft light of dawn spilling through the windows, she realized something unexpected. Her fear no longer carried the same weight, because somewhere in the quiet, in the midst of the turmoil, a seed of courage had taken root. And though the world outside threatened to consume them, her heart whispered of something deeper, something enduring. Healing had begun, and with it a love that refused to be silenced. And as the sun rose, painting the city in shades of gold, Lily's story moved forward, toward secrets that would unravel, toward battles yet to be fought, toward a love that would not be bound by contracts, but by something far greater, something eternal. Rain whispered against the windows of the penthouse, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the turbulence in Lily's chest. The night had been long, filled with words left unsaid, and silences that weighed heavier than any argument. She sat curled at the edge of the bed, her knees drawn close, the soft silk of her gown still clinging to her from the gala. Every flicker of memory haunted her, the venom in Vanessa's eyes, the veiled threats in Damien's voice, and the way Adrian's hand had never loosened from hers, even when the world around them tried to tear them apart. She should have felt broken, but there was a strange warmth lingering inside her, fragile yet undeniable. Adrian had warned her of danger, had told her again and again to stay on the surface of their arrangement, but her heart refused. It was no longer just about saving her gallery, no longer just about enduring 12 months of a contract. She was in the middle of something deeper, something that pulled her toward Adrian with an intensity she could not name. Healing sometimes begins in the quietest places, and for Lily it began in the silent acknowledgement that she no longer feared him. She feared what it would mean to lose him. Adrian entered the room without a sound, his presence filling the air like stormlight. He had discarded his jacket, his sleeves rolled up, his sharp edges softened by exhaustion, and yet he carried himself with the same commanding grace. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching her, as though memorizing the way she looked beneath the dim glow of the lamp. She expected him to speak, to remind her of the rules, to close the distance with his usual calculated confidence. But instead, he exhaled a breath so heavy it seemed to unravel something inside him. "You shouldn't have listened at the door," he said at last, his voice low, a mixture of steel and weariness. She looked up, her pulse skipping, remembering the whispers she had overheard, dangerous secrets hidden beneath his calm exterior, words that hinted at a life far darker than he had ever revealed. She wanted to retreat, to deny she had heard anything, but her heart demanded truth. "Then tell me," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "What is it you're hiding?" For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Adrian crossed the room, his footsteps deliberate, and lowered himself to sit beside her. The scent of his cologne, rich, dark, intoxicating, wrapped around her like an embrace. His hand brushed against the mattress, not quite touching hers, but close enough to make her breath falter. "There are things in my past," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the rain-streaked glass. "Things that were meant to stay buried. My family, my brother, the fire that took them all." His voice tightened, and Lily felt the raw ache beneath the words, a wound that had never truly healed. "I survived, but survival came with a cost, and that cost has been chasing me ever since." Her heart ached for him, not with pity, but with the kind of compassion that softens walls. Slowly, she placed her hand over his, feeling the tension in his fingers, the restraint he tried so hard to keep. "You don't have to carry it alone," she murmured. "Not anymore." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp, unreadable, and yet beneath the storm she caught something vulnerable, something almost fragile. For a moment he looked like a man caught between shadows and light, torn between the instinct to push her away and the yearning to finally be seen. When he didn't pull back, Lily felt something within her settle, like a fracture beginning to mend. The hours that followed unfolded not in grand declarations, but in quiet revelations. He spoke of Elliot, the twin whose absence haunted him like a ghost. He confessed the fire was no accident, that betrayal had clawed its way into his bloodline, leaving him with scars he could never erase. Lily listened, her heart breaking with every word, but also stitching itself together with the certainty that his pain was not his alone anymore. She was part of it now, part of him, whether he wished it or not. And yet the more she learned, the clearer it became. Their marriage had never been just a contract. It was a collision of destinies, bound not only by survival, but by truths neither had chosen, yet both were forced to face. The gallery, her father's legacy, was no longer simply a symbol of her past. It was tied to Adrian's, to Elliot, to the fire that had consumed more than one family. The threads of their lives had been intertwined long before ink had ever touched paper. When dawn broke, the first pale light spread across the room, soft and forgiving. Adrian had fallen silent, his hand still beneath hers, his expression carved with the weight of confession. Lily turned her face toward the window, watching the rain ease into a gentle drizzle, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun, she felt a fragile sense of healing seep into her soul. But healing does not mean the storm has passed. It only means the heart is learning to endure it. And as Lily leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion finally pulling her into restless sleep, she knew the storm outside was far from over. Secrets had only begun to surface. Enemies had only started to move their pieces, and the world that judged their union as a farce would soon discover how dangerously real it had become. Adrian remained awake, watching the fragile rise and fall of her breath, his chest tight with an ache he could not name. He had promised himself detachment, vowed never to let a contract become something more. But as he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering longer than they should, he understood the truth that terrified him most. Lily was no longer just his wife by agreement. She was his weakness, his anchor, his healing, and perhaps the only reason he had left to fight. The city stirred awake beyond the glass, unaware of the war looming in the shadows. And as the new day began, so too did the next chapter of their dangerous, intoxicating bond, one that would test not only their survival, but the very essence of the love neither of them had ever believed they deserved. The glass shattered against the marble floor, and the silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. Lily froze, the article trembling in her hands, the black words of betrayal burning into her vision. Headlines screamed across the page, accusing, cruel, twisting their marriage into a staged spectacle. To the world, she was a gold digger, a pawn who had sold herself to the highest bidder. To the world, Adrian was a man hiding behind lies, a ruthless billionaire protecting his empire with a fabricated love. She wanted to breathe, but each word stole air from her lungs. She had thought she understood sacrifice, had thought she was prepared for the whispers, but nothing could prepare her for the sting of being reduced to a headline, for the ache of seeing her name dragged through mud when all she had ever tried to do was protect what her father had built. Her gallery, her reputation, her dignity, all of it was being devoured by a storm she hadn't asked for. Adrien stood by the window, his shoulders taut, his profile sharp against the night. His silence was louder than any fury could have been. His empire had been built on control, on turning chaos into victory, yet tonight even he seemed to waver. His hand clenched at his side, but his voice, when it came, was calm, almost too calm. They think they can destroy us with this. Us. The word lodged itself in her chest, unexpected and piercing. He had not said me. He had not said you. He had said us. And for a fleeting heartbeat, that single syllable was enough to steady her trembling hands. The world might believe their love was a farce, but Lily could feel the truth in the way Adrian turned toward her, his gaze burning with something raw, something fierce. He wasn't angry at her, he was furious for her. That realization alone was healing in its own way, softening the jagged edges of her fear. When he stepped forward, she almost faltered beneath the weight of his presence. "They can call it a lie," he said, his tone like steel tempered in fire. "But they don't get to decide what we are. They don't get to define you." His hand reached out, brushing the crumpled article from her grip, replacing it with the solid warmth of his fingers closing around hers. The contact sent a current through her, a spark that soothed even as it ignited. She wanted to resist, to tell herself it was just another move in his endless game of control. Yet when she met his eyes, she found no calculation there, only truth, only a storm that mirrored her own. The days that followed were a blur of flashing cameras, relentless questions, and shadows lurking in every corner of their lives. But in the eye of the storm, there were moments, fragile, fleeting, yet achingly real. Adrian pulling her close when the crowd grew too loud. His voice low against her ear, promising, "You're safe." The brush of his hand at her back, as though reminding her she was no longer standing alone. It terrified her how much she had begun to need those moments, how much she had begun to crave the comfort of his presence, the healing warmth that spread through her when his eyes softened, even for a second. But safety was never meant to last. Another leak struck like lightning, and this time it cut deeper. Photos surfaced, intimate, stolen moments that were never meant for the world. The way Adrian's hand lingered on hers, the way his gaze softened when he thought no one was watching, the way their bodies leaned too close, as if gravity itself refused to let them part. They were not lies. They were not fabrications. They were truth. And truth, laid bare for a world hungry for scandal, became its own weapon. Lily stared at the images, her pulse pounding, her throat tight. Someone was watching them. Someone who knew how to strike where it would hurt most. "We're being hunted," she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a dawning realization. This was not just about business. This was personal. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "Let them watch," he growled, his voice low, dangerous. "I'll find them. And when I do—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the promise in his tone was enough to make the air itself tremble. That night, the walls of the penthouse felt closer, the shadows heavier. But when Lily lay in the quiet, her thoughts spiraling, she felt the bed shift as Adrian slipped beside her, not with the arrogance of a man claiming what was his, but with the weariness of someone who had fought too long alone. He didn't touch her, not at first. He simply lay there, his breath steady in the silence, his presence a shield against the storm raging outside. And slowly, tentatively, she turned toward him. Her hand found his beneath the covers, and when his fingers tightened around hers, the fear inside her eased. Healing, she realized, didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it was in the quiet. Two souls bound not by contracts, but by the fragile, unspoken trust growing between them. Morning would bring new battles. Headlines would twist again. Enemies would press harder. But in that moment, as dawn's first light spilled across the room, Lily understood something undeniable. No matter what the world believed, no matter how the storm raged, she and Adrian had already begun to write their own truth. And as the day broke, their story pressed forward, toward revelations waiting in shadows, toward betrayals yet to be unmasked, toward a love that was no longer just a possibility, but a force that neither time nor scandal could erase. The message arrived like a knife in the dark, sharp enough to steal the breath from Lily's lungs. "Check your inbox, Mrs. Carter. You'll find the truth hiding in plain sight." Her hands trembled as she opened the attachment, heart pounding so hard she could barely see. It was the contract, the one she had signed in desperation, the one she thought she understood. Line after line of familiar legal jargon blurred before her eyes, until her gaze caught on the hidden clause highlighted in red. If she failed to uphold the marriage for 1 full year, Every Carter asset, including the gallery, her home, every fragment of her father's legacy, would transfer permanently to Adrian Knight. The words struck like thunder. Her breath caught, her stomach twisted, and a cold fury burned its way through her veins. She had believed this arrangement was survival, a chance to preserve the dream her father had built. But the fine print revealed the truth. It was a trap, designed with precision, leaving her cornered with no way out. She stormed through the penthouse halls, the contract clutched in her hands like a weapon. Adrian was waiting in his study, framed against the glittering skyline, a glass of whiskey poised in his hand. He looked calm, controlled, devastatingly untouchable. But Lily no longer saw power. She saw betrayal. The contract slammed onto his desk, the sound sharp enough to break the silence. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage. "Explain this." Adrian's gaze lowered to the document, then rose to meet hers, unflinching. He took a slow sip of whiskey before setting it down, his expression unreadable. "So," he murmured, his lips curving into a faint, dangerous smirk, "you finally read the fine print." Her hands curled into fists, her chest heaving. You knew I wouldn't see it." "That's not my fault, sweetheart," he replied smoothly, leaning back with infuriating composure. "You signed it." The words sliced through her, bitter and cold. "So that was your plan, to wait for me to fail, then take everything? My gallery, my home, my father's legacy?" He exhaled, tapping his fingers against the rim of his glass. "You're looking at this the wrong way." "There is no other way," she spat, the tremor in her voice betraying the crack in her heart. Adrian rose, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them until the heat of his presence pressed against her like fire. "I never said I wanted you to fail," he murmured. His voice was low, steady, carrying something far more dangerous than arrogance: truth. Her breath faltered, her anger colliding with confusion. "Then what do you want?" His answer came without hesitation, his gaze locking onto hers with the force of gravity. "You!" The world stilled around her. For a moment, she forgot the contract, the betrayal, the lies. The way he said it, without games, without calculation, made something inside her shift. She wanted to call him a liar, to shove him away, but her body betrayed her with every shudder of her breath. "Then why the contract?" she whispered. Adrian lifted his hand, fingers tracing the line of her arm with a touch that burned and soothed all at once. "Because I knew you'd never willingly stay." Her heart stuttered, torn between fury and yearning. "That's not love," she breathed. "That's control." A muscle in his jaw tensed, his eyes darkening with frustration. "You think I wanted this?" His voice roughened, breaking through his usual restraint. "You think I enjoyed manipulating you?" "Didn't you?" she challenged, though her voice wavered under the weight of his stare. For a moment, something raw flickered in his eyes, a storm she wasn't sure he could contain. Then, without warning, he snatched the contract from the desk, ripped it clean in half, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. Lily gasped, her heart racing as the shredded paper scattered between them. "What are you doing?" "Showing you," Adrian said, his voice low, steady, almost pleading, "that you were never the one being played." Confusion tangled with disbelief. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. "Then who sent me that message?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze sharpened, every line of his face etched with a quiet intensity. Someone who wants you to believe I'm your enemy. Someone who knows exactly how to push you until you break. Her pulse hammered. A chill slid down her spine, as if unseen eyes were already watching. You're lying. Adrian leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, his words soft yet searing. Am I? Then tell me, sweetheart. Why now? Why wait until you started to trust me? Why not the day you signed? The truth of it rattled her. Whoever had sent the message had waited, calculated, chosen this moment with cruel precision. Doubt spread through her veins, tangled with a fragile thread of trust she could not sever from Adrian, no matter how hard she tried. A crash echoed from the hallway. The door slammed open, the handle striking the wall, but no one stood there. Only shadows, shifting like whispers of danger. Adrian was on his feet in an instant, his expression sharp, his body coiled like a predator. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice edged with steel. Before she could protest, he vanished into the hall, leaving Lily in the dimly lit study, her heart pounding with dread. The lamp flickered once, then died, plunging the room into darkness. She barely had time to gasp before a cold whisper brushed her ear, a voice that didn't belong to Adrian. "Be careful who you trust, Lily." A scream rose in her throat, but it was silenced by a hand clamping over her mouth, pulling her back into the shadows. The night wrapped around her like a cage, and as the world dissolved into fear, Lily understood one thing with chilling clarity. Whatever game she had stepped into, it was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And Adrian, whether savior or captor, was at the center of it all. The storm had only just begun, and with every beat of her heart, she was being pulled deeper into its eye, where love and betrayal twisted into something neither of them could escape. The storm outside raged like a mirror of her thoughts, rain lashing against the glass as though the sky itself had chosen to weep for her. Lily stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving, her pulse a frantic drumbeat she could not silence. The shadows of the study still clung to her skin, the echo of that phantom voice, "Be careful who you trust," still tangled in her breath. She had been dragged into darkness, silenced, nearly broken, and yet Adrian had pulled her free before the night devoured her entirely. She could still feel the heat of his arms around her, the iron strength in his grip, the unspoken fury in his voice as he swore he would never let anyone touch her again. But safety was not freedom. She stared at him now, across the penthouse living room, his tall frame poised with too much control, his eyes unreadable. He leaned casually against the bar as though nothing had happened, as though the chaos of the night had not carved itself into her soul. She wanted to scream at him, to demand the truth, to demand to know who was hunting her and why his world was a battlefield she could no longer escape. Instead, her voice fractured into something sharper, something desperate. "You can't keep me here." His lips curved, not with amusement, but with a kind of cold inevitability. "I don't have to keep you, sweetheart. You signed the contract. You chose this." The words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they reminded her of the cage she had walked into willingly. Yet cages, even gilded ones, always suffocate. Her fists clenched at her sides. "You tricked me." Adrian tilted his head, the low hum of danger in his posture. "No, Lily, you tricked yourself. You had every page in front of you. You signed because you wanted salvation, not truth." Her heart pounded with equal parts fury and grief. "I won't be your puppet. I won't play the perfect wife while you pull strings I don't even understand." For the first time, his mask shifted. His eyes darkened, something raw flickering there, something too vulnerable to be feigned. He moved closer, the weight of his presence stealing the air from her lungs. "And what strings are those?" he asked softly, his voice low, dangerous, intimate. Her lips parted, the words trembling out. "You want everything, my gallery, my family's name, my life, and when you're done, you'll discard me like the rest." A soft chuckle escaped him, but there was no humor in it. His fingers lifted, brushing along the curve of her jaw, tender where his words were sharp. "If I wanted to destroy you, Lily, I could have done it months ago. I don't need you in my penthouse for that." The truth in his voice stole her breath. She jerked away from his touch, her body warring with itself, the betrayal she carried and the ache that rose whenever he came near. "Then what do you want from me?" He paused, and in that silence the storm outside seemed to still, as if waiting. His eyes softened, only for a heartbeat, only enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the mask. "You'll find out soon enough." The cryptic answer sent shivers through her. He turned, his voice suddenly smooth again, distant, as though the vulnerability had never existed. "Pack a bag. We're attending the Sinclair Gala tomorrow night." Her heart lurched. "No, I'm not playing dress-up for your games." He glanced at her, his smirk curling like a blade. "Refuse, and I'll consider it defiance. And you know what the contract says about defiance." Her blood ran cold. The reminder wasn't just about money, it was about control. For a moment, fear threatened to consume her, but beneath it, something else rose. Resolve. Healing sometimes means standing even when your knees tremble, reclaiming pieces of yourself one breath at a time. She would not let him dictate every step of her life. Not anymore. When she shut herself in her bedroom, the echo of his warning lingered. Yet by morning, the fear had transformed into fire. She refused to be powerless. If Adrian thought she would submit, he was mistaken. The day unfolded with deceptive calm. Adrian disappeared into meetings, his voice drifting through rooms as he barked orders over the phone, his empire spinning around him like a kingdom built on storms. Lily moved quietly, her steps light as she explored corners of the penthouse she had never dared to before. It was there, in the West Wing, that she found it. A door, unlike the others, tucked away as if hidden on purpose. Her fingers brushed the handle. It wasn't locked. The room beyond was cloaked in shadow, filled with the faint scent of dust and something old, almost sorrowful. Her breath caught. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, black and white, sepia, some newer, some decades old, lives frozen in frames, faces captured in time. Her pulse raced as her eyes darted across them, searching for answers that seemed to whisper from the edges. And then she saw it. An envelope resting on a desk, a name scrawled across it in sharp ink. Elliot Knight. Her blood turned to ice. Hands trembling, she reached for it, the weight of the paper like a stone in her palm. She barely had time to slip her finger beneath the seal before a voice sliced through the silence. "Find anything interesting?" She spun, heart slamming against her ribs. Adrian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his silhouette carved against the dim light of the hall. For a long moment, neither moved. She clutched the envelope to her chest as though it could shield her, though she knew nothing could. "Who is Elliot Knight?" Her voice was steady, but her heart thundered. Adrian stepped inside, each stride deliberate, his gaze locked onto hers with unnerving intensity. His lips curved into a dark smile that held no amusement. "You really don't want to know." Her breath caught, but the fire inside her would not yield. "Maybe I do." He stopped inches from her, his scent enveloping her, his presence pressing down until her knees threatened to give. He reached out, plucked the envelope from her grip with deliberate slowness, and tucked it into his pocket. "I'll tell you this much," he murmured, his voice low, dangerous, almost tender. "If you keep digging, you might not like what you find." Her pulse hammered, her chest tight with 1,000 questions, but his eyes left no room for escape. He turned toward the door, leaving her trembling in the silence, the storm outside echoing the storm within. And as the night deepened, Lily knew the truth was closer than ever, close enough to touch, close enough to burn. Secrets had begun to unravel, and the name Elliot Knight was the thread that could destroy them both. The storm pressed harder against the penthouse windows, lightning splitting the sky into fractured light, thunder rolling through the silence between them. Lily stood at the threshold of Adrian's study, her fingers trembling against the edge of the desk, her pulse racing with a need for answers she could no longer suppress. She had found the hidden room, the photographs, the envelope, and above all, the name that would not let her rest. Elliot Knight. Adrian leaned against the bar cart, the amber glow of whiskey in his hand, his eyes shadowed but sharp. His composure was a mask, but she had seen the cracks. She had seen the tension in his shoulders when she whispered the name, had watched the way his grip tightened around the glass until the ice cracked within. His voice came low, calm, edged with warning. "You went through my things." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to hold her ground. "I found something you didn't want me to see." The air between them thickened. Adrian's silence was heavier than rage. His eyes, blue fire against the storm, locked onto hers with unrelenting intensity. "Who is Elliot Knight?" she pressed, her voice breaking only at the edges. His jaw clenched. For a moment she thought he might shatter the glass against the wall, but instead he set it down, carefully, as though control was the only thing keeping him from breaking. He crossed the room, each step steady, measured, until the distance between them dissolved. His hand lifted, fingers brushing her jaw with an intimacy that sent her breath scattering. "You want the truth," he murmured, his voice a storm wrapped in velvet. "Fine. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it." Her pulse thundered. "Tell me." He studied her for a long, heavy silence, then reached into his desk drawer. From within, he pulled an old, worn envelope, its edges yellowed with time. He handed it to her without a word. Her hands shook as she unfolded the flap, a photograph slipping out. 2 boys, identical, smiling, their arms slung around each other like the world could never break them apart. Her breath caught. "Your twin," she whispered. Adrian's eyes darkened. "Elliot?" She looked up, her chest aching with questions. "Why have you never told anyone? Why hide him?" his lips pressed into a hard line. His voice, when it came, was raw, stripped of the armor he usually wore. "Because he's dead." The words carved into her, heavy and merciless. The photograph trembled in her grip. What happened? He turned away, running a hand through his dark hair, his shoulders taut with memory. For the first time since she had known him, he looked lost. 17 years ago. A fire. They said it was an accident, but I know better. It wasn't flames that killed him. It was betrayal. The pain in his voice pierced her, a wound that had never healed. She stepped closer, her voice soft, fragile. "I'm so sorry." His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look at her. "Don't be. Not yet." He turned then, his eyes holding a storm that made her heart tremble. Because that fire was set on purpose. And Elliot, he died because of what he knew. Her stomach twisted. What did he know? Adrian's gaze bore into her, heavy with a truth that tasted like poison. "Your father's gallery." Lily froze, the photograph slipping from her hand. "My father's gallery." He nodded, his voice low, dangerous. Elliot uncovered something, a painting. He said it held proof of something powerful enough to destroy the people who wanted him gone. The night before he died, he called me. He told me he had it. And then the fire came. Her pulse roared in her ears. The gallery, her father's legacy, the very thing she had fought to protect, was tied to Adrian's deepest wound. "What painting?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "A woman in a field, holding a single white rose." His breath hitched, his jaw tightening. It was the last thing Elliot ever spoke of. Lily staggered back, her mind spinning. She remembered it. The painting hidden away in the gallery's private collection, the one her father never let anyone touch. He had always dismissed it as worthless. But now the image burned in her memory, heavy with unspoken secrets. Adrian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Lily, this isn't just about you or me. It's about the truth. Your father knew something. Elliot died for it. And now they'll come for you." Her chest ached with a pain she couldn't name. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling, replaced by shadows and secrets she didn't want to believe. Yet beneath the fear, a strange warmth bloomed. Adrian wasn't just confessing, he was trusting her. For a man built of walls and silence, that trust was a gift more fragile than glass. Healing, she realized, wasn't always about easing pain. Sometimes it was about carrying it together, binding wounds with the thread of shared truth. Her hand lifted, trembling, and touched his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, his eyes closing for the briefest moment, as though her touch was the first peace he had felt in years. When he opened them, the storm inside him had softened, just enough to let her see the boy he once was, the one who had lost his twin, his anchor, his world. And in that moment she knew, whatever came next, whatever secrets awaited in the shadows, she would not let him fight them alone. The lights flickered, pulling them both back into the present. Glass shattered in the distance, footsteps echoing through the hall. Adrian's expression hardened instantly, his hand closing around hers with unyielding force. "They're here." The storm outside answered with a roar, and as the penthouse plunged into darkness, Lily realized the truth was no longer just hidden in the past. It had come for them, alive and merciless, and together they would have to face it. The city burned in silence, not with flames, but with whispers and lies that spread faster than any fire could. Screens across the world lit up with Lily's face, her voice twisted by careful edits, her image painted as a gold digger who had trapped Adrian Wolfe in a calculated snare. She stood in the center of the penthouse living room, barefoot on the cold floor, her hands trembling as the cruel headlines repeated again and again. Each word cut like glass, each accusation tore deeper than the last. She wanted to scream, to deny, to claw the truth back into the world, but her throat felt locked, her breath caught somewhere between rage and despair. Adrian stood by the window, his back to her, his silhouette carved against the glow of the city. He didn't speak, but his silence was sharper than fury, a silence laced with pain. His fists were clenched at his sides, his reflection fractured in the glass, as though even the city itself could no longer hold him whole. When he finally turned, his eyes burned with something rawer than anger, not hatred, hurt. "Tell me this isn't true." His voice came low, dangerous in its restraint. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Adrian, you know me. You know I would never—" "Do I?" His laugh was bitter, a broken sound. "Because the entire world thinks I've been a fool, that I let you walk into my life, into my home, into my bed, just to tear me apart." Tears blurred her vision. She crossed the space between them, reaching for him, but he stepped back. The distance he put between them hurt more than the headlines ever could. Her voice cracked, but she pushed the words through the ache in her chest. "It's fake. It's manipulated. That isn't me. You have to believe me." For a heartbeat, silence stretched. His eyes searched hers, fierce, merciless, and yet beneath the storm she saw it. A flicker of doubt, yes, but also of love, buried deep, refusing to die. His jaw tightened, and he exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something heavy. "I don't care what they say," he whispered finally. "I care who did this to you." Relief broke through her like sunlight after a storm. She swallowed the sob rising in her throat as Adrian pulled out his phone, his voice steel when he spoke into it. "Trace the leak. I want names, addresses, everything. Tonight." His hand trembled, but his resolve was unshakable. They think they can destroy her. They think they can destroy us. They have no idea who they're dealing with. For the first time in days, Lily felt the sharp edge of fear dull into something warmer. Not safety, because she knew nothing about this life was safe, but belonging. Adrian's fury wasn't directed at her, it was for her. He wasn't defending his empire, he was defending her soul. And that realization was healing in a way she could barely understand, stitching cracks in her heart with threads of fire. The hours that followed blurred into chaos. Reporters camped outside the building, their shouts echoing into the night. Online, her name trended alongside venom and ridicule, strangers eager to crucify a woman they had never met. But amid the noise, Adrian moved like a man reborn. He stood before cameras, his words measured, his presence unyielding. "My wife," he announced to the world, "is being targeted. This is not truth. It is sabotage. If anyone wishes to come after her, they will go through me." The declaration rippled across headlines, his defiance turning the tide. Where there had been doubt, now there was fire. Where there had been betrayal, now there was battle. Lily watched from the shadows, her chest aching, her eyes wet. She had expected Adrian to protect his empire, but instead he had sacrificed it for her. When the sun rose, everything had changed. Adrian's company stocks plummeted, the board was in uproar, investors bayed for blood. But none of it mattered to him. He walked into the boardroom later that morning, cameras waiting, the world watching, and surrendered the crown he had fought for his entire life. "I am stepping down as CEO of Wolf Industries," he declared, his voice calm, steady, unbreakable, not as a defeat, not as surrender, but as a choice. "I will not trade the woman I love for a throne built on ashes." The room erupted, the world reeled, but Lily, watching from the wings, could only cover her mouth with her trembling hands, her soul burning with a mixture of anguish and awe. He had given up everything, not for power, not for pride, but for her. That night they stood together in the ruins of her gallery. Flames had taken the walls, the canvases, the very heart of her father's dream. Smoke still curled into the sky, the scent of loss thick in the air. Lily fell to her knees, her chest shuddering with grief. Adrian knelt beside her, his arms circling her, anchoring her against the weight of despair. "I gave up my empire," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "But I will not let them take you. I will not lose you too." Her tears fell against his chest, and in the hollow of his embrace something fierce bloomed. The gallery was gone. His empire lay in ashes. But their hearts beat together, two rhythms becoming one, and in that union healing stirred, a quiet promise that from ruin something stronger could rise. They left the smouldering wreckage with only each other, hand in hand. The road ahead was lined with enemies, betrayals yet to be revealed, shadows waiting to strike. But for the first time, Lily no longer felt like prey in a dangerous game. With Adrian beside her, she felt like fire. And to you who have walked with them through every storm, every whisper of betrayal, every fragile moment of trust, your presence is the light that keeps their story alive. If this journey has touched your heart, if you've felt even a spark of healing in their fire, let it echo. Leave your thoughts in the comments, share what lingers in your soul, and let your voice be part of this story. Like, subscribe, and stay with us for what comes next. Because this love is only beginning, and every heartbeat matters in the chapters yet to come.